Welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast. This is Danielle Harris, Commissioner of the Wisconsin Intercollegiate Athletic Conference. The Charles Whitcomb Leadership Institute taught me the importance of aligning my values with my life's work and purpose of being a connector, a facilitator, and a servant leader. Through the Institute, I was able to meet some amazing people from all three divisions across the association. And because of those relationships forged, many of my classmates have become extended family members. My leadership philosophy is to empower others to make smart, thoughtful, and necessary decisions for the greater good of the organization.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown, and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at 1Q Leadership. I am joined today by Debro. Ann is the Associate General Counsel for Athletics at University of Mississippi. Greetings, Ann. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for asking me to be on.
It's an interesting title, interesting position, right?
Yeah.
Are there other positions like that in college athletics?
Very few.
Okay.
I work for the General Counsel, and there are several associate general counsels that have athletics as part of their, I guess you could say, case file or their
portfolio of work.
Portfolio.
On campus, yeah.
What was interesting about this position when I applied for it is that I am actually housed in the athletics department at Ole Miss, and there for all of the times that they need an attorney without them having to pick up the phone and call because I'm right down the hallway.
Yeah. Oh, that's super interesting. Now, prior to that, you were general counsel on campus.
I was general counsel at Alabama A&M University, at HBCU, located in Huntsville, Alabama, which is also my alma mater.
Which is excellent. And then prior to that, you were a prosecutor.
I was. For 15 years. I worked state and federal courts and had a very varied experience making the transition from prosecution to higher ed.
I imagine there's a difference.
Oh, there's a huge difference.
And I imagine there was a motivation to make that switch from prosecution to higher education.
It was. My practice as a prosecutor was mostly focused on white-collar crime, but as part of that, I would prosecute cases that involved a lot of younger people, even though I did have a lot of established individuals that could be prosecuted. But the one thing that I noticed during these times from state and federal court was that education seemed to play a role, more so the lack of education.
Okay.
A lot of the defendants I saw typically didn't graduate from high school, or if they did, they dropped out of college if they went to college. With both of my parents being educators, I shied away from education, but when I saw this trend growing, it just kind of made me rethink what I was doing and make the transition over to education to see if I could, help in another way.
That's interesting. So the motivation to make that transition also probably becomes a major personal evaluation point as you were doing that work.
It did.
As general counsel.
It really did.
Tell me about that, evaluating the outcomes personally on campus when you were in that general counsel role.
Well, what I loved about being in the general counsel role was, even though I was doing a lot of legal work for the university, I had the opportunity to interact with students. And in interacting with students, you had the opportunity to provide advice and counsel, hopefully show them what they could be in the process. I had several students that would come by when they would graduate, tell me where they were going. When I started teaching the legal ethics class that I taught on campus in our business school, a lot of them really came back to tell me, I'm glad I took your course. It made me really think about what I want to do. And I had one student that actually went to the FBI, and he was really scared about leaving Huntsville and going to an area where there were very few African Americans. And he said, but I just don't know what to do. And I said, you have to step outside your zip code. You have to really push forward and make the life that you want. And it was very rewarding for me when he came back 2 years later to tell me he had managed to make it through his plight, as he called it. And that he was back in Huntsville and able to just really do the work that he wanted to do because he had, pushed forward on that decision based on our talks.
Yeah, I find that interesting. I'll tell you why. I don't have the knowledge of the general counsel role but I wonder how much does the general counsel role interact with students on a campus?
It doesn't a lot, and it's
Right.
what I do is very intentional to make sure that I do have an opportunity to reach out to student athletes. What I'm enjoying about my current role is that I'm part of our NIL team. So, as you know, the NCAA allows us to do education for our student athletes. So, I work very closely with compliance, and we do our educational sessions on telling the student athletes about the law, and how they can contact us if they have questions.
Okay.
I can't provide them legal advice, but I can make sure that they are well aware of what our state law does, and then put them in contact with compliance to make sure that they don't mess up their eligibility.
What was the description of the job, right? When
Hmm.
you were figuring out if you wanted to take it. And then what has the job evolved to since you've been doing it for about a year?
So prior to me coming to Ole Miss, they had the job was head compliance officer, associate general counsel. And so um, they decided to split those roles and provide just the opportunity for associate general counsel. And in looking at the description, it was described as working closely with the athletics department, providing legal advice, contracts, different things of that nature. And that's really what I've done. Since NIL is on the scene, I also, as I said, work with compliance. So that's an added benefit that I didn't have at my previous position. But the role that I play is very similar to what I did as general counsel, in that I review contracts, provide advice, sit with the leadership team, and I'm present to make sure that when they want to make a decision, they can pick up the phone and I'm right there, versus having to get on someone's schedule
Yeah,
and make, like, can we do this? So,
that's interesting because that sounds like what compliance has done in the past, right?
yeah, well, it's still
Yeah,
compliance, it's still present. It's just that legal, sometimes you have that legal question that you just need
which
answered.
is a
And,
major thing.
and you really want to answer right then, because, hey, this is athletics. We need to move. We need to
Yeah,
do what we have to do. So it's very good being able to be there and be a sounding board and be an advocate
yeah.
for them.
Talk about that pace, the urgency of athletics, right?
It is a very fast-paced,
Hmm.
fast-moving, and just being prepared for what comes next, because you never know what's around the corner. You just really have to just be in the moment, as I see it.
When you were in your previous iteration of general counsel,
Uh-huh.
did things move that fast, or was there a whole process to being able to make decisions on things?
I would say that there were certain processes that move that
Yeah.
fast. It wasn't a day-to-day and everyday, constant grind. So to have the extra time sometimes makes a difference, but even moving at fast pace, as long as you are aware of what you always ask the same questions regardless of how fast or how slow you move. What are the facts, what is the end goal, and how do we get there? And do we need to make a legal interpretation, or is this just like I said, just a common compliance
Yeah.
issue that I don't have to be involved
Yeah, like
in?
why is this on my desk right now?
Yeah.
That's hilarious. How was that transition into understanding that college athletics is like now, evolve, change, now.
Well, I like to operate in my own mind with a sense of urgency, because my thing is, if somebody asks me a question, they want the answer. So the sense of urgency has not really created a
Okay,
problem for me in that
excellent.
respect, because when I ask a question, I want to answer right then
Yeah,
too. So
exactly.
I just really try to make sure that I, provide the right information and able to respond in a manner that's, I guess you could say, that coincides with the request.
Yeah, which is important. Let's talk about an HBCU PWI,
Okay.
right? SEC
The
football,
SWAC.
kind of, yeah, the SWAC, right?
Yeah.
Driver for college athletics is football in terms of revenue,
Right.
right? But the student athlete experience is important no matter what sport someone plays. Tell me about the experiences on campus that may be a bit different now than what you've experienced in the
Well,
past.
one thing I would say is definitely facilities,
Okay.
and that's probably a larger driver than most people would think. Um, most HBCUs do have deferred maintenance issues.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm very pleased about is during my time at Alabama A&M, we were able to start construction on a new arena, which is now open there.
Yeah.
And, that student athlete experience with facilities makes a huge, huge, huge impression.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would be the one thing that I have seen so far as differences. And I think someone made the comment yesterday when I was in a session talking about when Deion Sanders came out to Colorado, and that was one of the issues that he saw, and it was just a big impression upon him as well. And hopefully all students can have that experience with great facilities and being able to play in great arenas. And we were very blessed at Alabama A&M. We had a 22,000 seat we have a 22,000 seat football stadium, and while I was there we turfed the field, and they're now returfing it because it's been that long, but it just made for a better experience for our student athletes. And that's what I sometimes see as the differing factor between
Yeah.
HBCUs and PWIs.
Yeah. Thinking about the ebb and flow, I guess, of work in athletics as the associate general counsel, but housed in athletics. Is there a continual process for you, or does everything arrive to you? It's almost like this is a brand new thing that we've never seen before. Like,
Well, everything always has a constant.
Yeah.
So for me, reviewing contracts, that was a constant between being associate general counsel and being general counsel. Speaking with our leadership and advising them when they have questions, that's a constant. So the ebb and flow really did not change. It
Okay.
just depended on, what the topic was for the day.
yeah, which I appreciate. In athletics, you think about purpose, right?
Mhm.
Purpose of an athletics department. You hope the purpose of an athletics department is to enhance the academic mission of the institution, right? Purpose of an athletics department is also to provide student athletes with an excellent experience that helps to enhance the academic mission of the institution. So I wonder about coming into athletics, which is an area where you didn't work before. How do you feel like your role is really doing that, and how does that affect you personally? You mentioned being in Alabama and students coming back to you after they dealt with you, but now directly with student athletes, like this is almost there's not as many layers when you're housed in athletics department.
No, it's
between
not
you.
that many layers, but I'm still getting to know the student athletes,
Yeah.
still finding my path and what does that look like for them. I do my job every day, and like I said, we are in the NIL space, so I do try to make my door open, that if they have an NIL question and it's something that I can answer for them, or at least direct them in the correct way or where they need to go. That's always my goal.
Yeah.
Is to be that resource and to be there and to let them know that I'm there.
Yeah. Have you found something challenging
Oh,
that you
wow.
can talk about?
I was going to say most of my challenges, they're not where I can discuss
Oh,
them.
okay.
But just sometimes being in the space and having the opportunities to provide advice and counsel,
Yeah.
it just makes for, I think, a different relationship when it comes to working with my counterparts.
Is there an aspect of a network around the country? You think about somebody who is a compliance officer, somebody who is a deputy over internal, somebody who's doing these things where they have counterparts around the country where it's easy to call.
Hmm.
Have you tapped into that network of people who, like you mentioned when we first started talking, there are general counsels or associate general counsels on campuses that have sports as part of their portfolio.
Hmm.
Have you tapped into that for any type of, just guidance and working with athletics?
Oh,
Or
absolutely. You can't operate on an island, so you have to have people that are there to assist you. And I do have colleagues that are very willing to assist those that have been working with athletics a longer period of time that I have. And they are always open to phone calls, and when we need assistance, they really working together with us, and we're trying to find answers,
yeah,
and trying to make sure that we're all doing it, very similarly, or at least we have an idea of what's going
Uh-huh.
on.
So this question, as it's developing in my head, I don't know how you could really
Okay.
answer it, but it's developing in my head, right? When you are like coming into college sports, working around people who work in sports, as opposed to people who didn't work in sports, I found that people who work in sports, coaches, etc., have a drive to continually be better and get better. I've also found that people that don't work in sports, the percentage is not as high of people who want to get better and get better. Some people are content with how they are. Is there a way for you to answer that question to tell me that now you work in sports, you are around a whole bunch of overachievers that are constantly trying to get better, right?
Well,
Without contrasting to who you used to work with, right? You know what I mean?
Well, I think it's a personal thing. I don't necessarily think it's a work in sport or don't work in sport. And I say that to say I grew up around sports.
Right.
So I understand the tenor, the tone, the expectation. And when I got to Ole Miss, that was my tenor and tone because I knew what the expectation was. And it's not to slight, anyone else. It's just that there's a different tempo when you get to athletics. And I think you just have to figure out, do you want to work within the tempo, or do you want to try to figure out how to beat your own drum, and will you be able to keep up pace if you beat your own drum?
And I appreciate that answer. I'll ask you this last question and then we'll wrap. Relative to NIL, is there a, for lack of a better word, algorithm or formula for student athletes to help them understand success in this era of college sports, right? If they're like a 6-year student athlete, they knew before and now they know after. But if they're just coming into it, how should they think coming into, especially a school like Mississippi and a conference like the SEC?
I'll just say the first thing that I think a student athlete needs to think about when it comes to NIL is their brand.
Okay.
They really need to look at their social media, find what's important to them, and make sure that their social media represents who they are.
Okay.
Then once they get to that point, they can figure out, or depending on where they are, someone can help them finding out who they can work with when it comes to NIL.
Right.
But it all starts with finding out who you are as an individual and making sure that your public-facing persona, your social media, your brand, that's what's reflected when you're ready to go out. Because I think that that's what people are going to look at and try to decide if you're their person and they want you to represent them.
Right. And what's crazy is that applies way more than NIL sports. That's across the board.
It's across the board.
Of life, right?
And I think that if you can start with that base, that is what is going to help you promote yourself and be that person in NIL and try to find what brand can work with you and which brand you can work with.
I mean, really in life, right?
Yeah.
You go out in the world to get a job, right? Understand
Exactly.
who you are and make sure whatever represents you represents you.
And not what is the next best thing.
Yeah.
And, and even as adults, we find out that we may have been in that position as well, doing what other people wanted us to do and not figuring out who our true selves are.
That's for a lot of us, that's a lifelong evolution
It's a
and learning.
lifelong evolution. And now we're asking 15 and 16-year-olds to think about it. And then when they get to college, go, this is who I am.
Yeah.
So.
Which is crazy, right?
Yeah.
Man, it took me 35 years and you're asking a 15 to 16, 17, 18-year-old. Well, and this has been an excellent conversation. And I really appreciate you joining us here on the One Question Leadership Podcast.
Well, thank you for asking, and I'm glad to be here.
Yes, ma'am. That was Debro. She is the Associate General Counsel for Athletics at University of Mississippi. And, of course, I am Ty Brown with the One Question Leadership Podcast. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.